Have you ever really thought about the journey of a scientific idea? You know, how it goes from a little spark in someone's mind to a headline all over the world? Well, it turns out it's not a simple path. It's a brutal story of evolution, a battle for survival. And to really get it, we need to look at ideas in a completely new way.
So let's start with a kind of mind-bending question. What if ideas weren't just abstract things? What if they were, in a way, alive? Like living things competing to survive in this giant ecosystem of our minds and our media. It sounds a little wild, I know, but stick with me, because it's the key to understanding, well, everything that's coming next. Okay, so let's actually run with that. Let's take this seriously. If ideas are alive, then just like any other living thing, they have one fundamental core drive: to survive and replicate. There's actually a cool name for this concept: idea pool lifeforms. The best way to think about it is like this. You know how genes use organisms like us to make copies of themselves? Well, ideas do the exact same thing, but they use communication systems, journals, websites, even our own chats to replicate, to spread, and to evolve. And here is the absolute crucial part. An idea's fitness, its ability to survive, depends completely on its habitat. An idea that might have thrived back in the day of handwritten letters and intellectual salons would probably die a lonely death on TikTok. And you know, the reverse is true too. The environment literally sets the rules for survival. All right, so to really see this in action, let's jump back in time. Let's go to the very first purpose-built, protected habitat ever created specifically for scientific ideas, the scientific journal. Think of those early scientific societies not just as publishers, but as gatekeepers, or maybe zookeepers for ideas. They created these journals to be controlled ecosystems, carefully filtering which idea life forms got to come in and replicate. This was a huge deal. It was a way to protect scientific thought from all the noise and chaos of public pamphlets and newspapers. So, what did an idea need to have in its DNA to survive in this early protected habitat? It really wasn't about being popular or flashy. No way. Success, getting to replicate, depended on being coherent, on being plausible, and having solid, rigorous methods. You had to play by the community's rules. Those were the traits that got you through the gate.
And you know, for a long time, this system worked pretty well. But then, the environment started to change, and a powerful new pressure began to build, one that would completely reshape the entire idea ecosystem.
The real turning point was around the mid-20th century. All of a sudden, the number of scientific journals just exploded, and that created a brand new problem. In this super crowded field, how do you figure out which ideas are actually important?
The answer they came up with? Metrics. Enter the impact factor, which basically just counts how many times a paper gets cited by other papers. And just like that, an idea's fitness wasn't just about being right anymore. Now it was about being cited. Being influential suddenly became a brand new and very powerful survival trait.
I mean, just look at how the survival traits shifted. It's like night and day. In the old journal habitat, things like coherence and rigor were king. But in this new impact habitat, they were suddenly competing with novelty, with being headline-worthy. A flashy, surprising idea that could grab attention now had a massive evolutionary advantage. The very DNA of what made a scientific idea successful was starting to mutate. And just as this new dynamic was starting to settle in, bam! A meteorite hits the ecosystem and completely terraforms the entire landscape almost overnight. That meteorite, of course, was the internet.
The pace of change was just staggering. First, in the 90s, you get preprint servers like Archive, which let ideas replicate instantly, completely bypassing those old journal gatekeepers. Then, in the 2000s, open access models changed the game again. And finally, the 2010s brought us social media, which created this chaotic, super high-speed habitat where ideas could spread like viruses.
So the strategies for replication themselves had to evolve. We went from the slow, careful, filtered replication of the old journals to what you could call the mass spawning of preprints, just releasing thousands of ideas into the wild at once, all the way to the mimetic superspread of social media, where replication is instantaneous and global.
So that brings us to today. And today's world is, well, it's fragmented. There's no single habitat for ideas anymore. Instead, we have this complex world of competing niches, and each one is selecting for very, very different kinds of ideas. First, you've still got the traditional habitat of prestige journals. Think of this as the top of the food chain. The selective pressures here are all about big, novel, high-prestige ideas. This is the niche for ideas that want to be seen as groundbreaking, the top predators of the scientific world.
Then you have the preprint servers. This habitat doesn't really care about prestige, it selects for speed. The key survival trait here isn't being the biggest, it's being the fastest. It's about getting your idea out there first and replicating as quickly as possible, kind of like colonizing an intellectual space before anyone else can get there.
And finally, we have the wildest, most chaotic habitat of them all, our social media feeds. In this environment, the ideas that thrive, the ones that survive and replicate, are the ones optimized for virality. And often, these are ideas that trigger really strong emotions, that confirm our biases, and that deepen our tribal divisions. Things like soundness and rigor, often totally irrelevant here.
So, in this crazy, chaotic world, what's supposed to protect the health of our collective knowledge? Well, traditionally, it's been a process that we can see in a new light now. You can think of peer review as a kind of community immune system.
But here's the problem. That immune system is under an incredible amount of stress. The old filters are weak, full of holes. Replication is practically free, which lets parasitic ideas, things like fraud, hype, or just simple mistakes, spread like wildfire. And, like we just saw, ideas that are perfectly designed for tribal identity can easily outcompete ideas that are simply sound and true.
Which leaves us with this final, and I think really crucial question. In an ecosystem that's now dominated by mimetic superspreaders and parasitic concepts, what new immune strategies do we need? How do we evolve to make sure that the ideas that survive and replicate are the ones that are actually healthy for us? How do we make sure that truth has a better fitness score than just pure virality?